I grew up on a dairy farm in southeastern Minnesota, outside a town of 1,800 people. My graduating high school class was 42. And I can remember when the first hug came into my family. I was 12, 13 years old, and we're all standing in the front yard of this beautiful farmhouse. There's a big maple tree in the front. The trunk is about as big around as one of those tables. And my grandfather, my grandmother, my mom, my dad, and myself are all lined up in a row. And we're waiting for my uncle to show up. I really like this uncle because every year he got a brand new car. And he was into Thunderbirds. And at that time, a Thunderbird was just an incredible vehicle to have, for these people from the boomer generation, they remember those things, in the 60s. And he pulls up into the yard with this light blue Thunderbird, jumps out of his car, walks around to the other side and does this bizarre custom I've never seen before happen in the family, and opens the door up for his now fiance who's come to meet the family. Now she comes out of the car and she has this unusual characteristic in that she's smiling. Because in our family, we're hardworking people, German background, and there must be something wrong if you laugh too much or you cry or you show any emotion at all. But I'm just fascinated that this lady just comes out and she's smiling. It's just incredible. And then she comes around and she goes up to my grandfather, who I think was born with the King James Bible welded to his side. I don't know that I ever saw him smile, and came up to her. She came up to him and gave him a great big hug, and he went straight as a board, because there had to be something horribly sinful about this attractive young woman coming up and hugging this married man. Well, she should have had a clue about the family at that point, that there might be something a little bit wrong. She goes to my grandmother, who had been dying for many, many years, and she would make sure that everybody knew she was sick, because at the dinner table, she'd have all her pills lined up around the plate, and she had asthma and emphysema and all kinds of things, and she was allergic to anything that moved. And she would take those pills while we were all sitting there, just all lined around that plate, and then gives her a hug, and she starts to go, and then she has to pull out that inhaler and goes, so she can breathe again. Well, you do not need to be a therapist to know what's going to happen now when she comes to my mother, who's the product of these two people. Gives her a big hug. She goes straight as a board, and there's this wrinkle on her brow, which I meant to me she was going to now have a severe migraine headache and was not going to get better until she went up to see the family physician, who would give her an injection of some major narcotic, and she would be asleep for the next 2-3 days while she's recovering from this migraine headache. Then she comes to my dad. Now, I watched my dad try to hug my mom, but she would run the other way. And, since he was a dairyman and there was so much bending, his knees were not too good, so he had a hard time catching her, although I do know he must have caught her 4 times, because there are 4 of us, and gives him a big hug. He wraps his arms around her and does not let go. It's like a camel that has gone across the Sahara Desert looking for that oasis, finds that oasis, is now going to drink at that water until it runs dry. Some of you women have been through this, and then I watch her peel his hands off of her. Then she comes to me. Now, I am in the heat of puberty. This is the woman of my dreams. I've already have seen her. She gives me a hug. I thought I had died and gone to heaven right there. And I always looked forward to that aunt coming, because she would give a hug. I would remember everything she said. Earl, hug your family, because when they die, you can't do that. Now, the other side of that story, which is not so pretty, later there was a divorce between an uncle and aunt, domestic violence. Didn't find this out till years later. I did not know the problem my uncle had with rage. My mom, it later came out that she was sexually abused as a teenager. And that story came out when the story of my sister having been sexually assaulted came out. And so over the years, there's been a lot of healing and a lot of grace and a lot of changes that have taken place. Every book I've ever written, it's been simply to help myself and to hope maybe somewhere along the line there'd be a side effect and maybe it would help other people. And then I started to learn about the brain, and then the pieces all began to fall into place, because definitely there's some things you can do in therapy. I'm a therapist. I make my living session by session, day in, day out. I've had tens of thousands of sessions. In my world, I'm known as an expert on PTSD treatment and innovation and healing experiences. I've been so blessed, beyond words. I have 4 adult children, and they like me. I mean, all the healing, all the recovery, all the money in therapy, it paid off. It was because I had to learn how to feel and how to connect. And then the last part of it was, which was always ongoing, there's always new things to learn, was learning about the brain, and that there was a role the brain played as well in our spirituality, in our emotions, in our relationships, and on it goes. And the story is not done, oh, my name is Earl. This is about your brain being in love. And that's my favorite ADHD kid, is Calvin and Hobbes. I mean, can you remember that cartoon strip? Well, that's a disgusting, slimy blob. Well, try it, you'll love it. Oh, yeah? Well, what if I don't love it? Well, it'll build character. Well, that's my dad, always looking out for me. Now, some men don't have a lot of insight. It takes them a little while to connect with things, that there might be a marital problem. Apparently, I've done something to upset you. It's kind of a clue. If there's a barbed wire, going down that middle of the bed, that there's something wrong. Now, low desire, panic, may be due to wrong medications and supplements. That's one of the things that we already spent time talking about. Everything you eat, everything you drink, everything you think causes a chemical change in your brain and in your body. And sometimes there's a need for medication, sometimes there's a need for supplements, sometimes the art and healing of the soul and from trauma has to do with how we weave the best of what God's given us and blessed us with to learn from. Now, your brain is a 3-pound supercomputer, the command and control center that's involved in everything you do. Determines how you think, how you feel, how you act, and how you get along with people. How rude or kind or how angry, how mean, how well you think on your feet, how well you learn. It determines the kind of person you are and how thoughtful you are. It's more complex than any supercomputer. You have 100 billion nerve cells in your brain. Every nerve cell has connections to every other nerve cell. Your brain has more connections in it than there are stars in the universe. Isn't that amazing that the universe that you have within here is greater than that world outside? The potential for change and creativity, this whole conference is about, the speakers that talked before me. You're given information and experience and feeling that helps generate new ideas and plans to help in the healing of people and children. Now, there's like an intimacy pyramid when you get to the spirituality and sexuality. 20 years ago, going through a real painful time, I hate to admit this, and I wish I could even say I was exaggerating, but it's not even a lie. I read 100 books on intimacy, sexuality, communication, lay books, professional books, spiritual books on this. And then I found this one book called Kosher Sex, written by a rabbi. If I had read that one first, I wouldn't have had to go through all those other ones. And it just amazed me, because I had never seen the words spiritual and sexual all wrapped up in the same phrase. It was just stunning. In fact, there's a word in the Old Testament, the word soul. And what it means in the Hebrew is thoughts, feelings, personality characteristics, need, and desire. Isn't that wild? So when you think of the word soul, it's the whole person from the bottom of your feet to the top of your head, the uniqueness of who you are. And your brain's intimately involved in how that works. Did you know that the structure you have here is a skeleton? In the Hebrew, that word skeleton not only means bones and structural sense, it also means the word self. There is something called a ligand. It's a nerve ending that's connected in the bone marrow, and you can find the other tip of it in the brain, and it's a marker for serotonin. And so you find the same kind of ligand for serotonin that's also a marker, shows up in the heart. And so when a person says they died of a broken heart, isn't that amazing? How you're wired, how you're made. And when we have a happy moment, we can laugh. If we all did a cotton swab at the moment of laughter, we'd find out that there's immunoglobulin A, immune system measurement goes up when you laugh and when you smile, when you think of pleasant memories. And that skeleton that you have right here, right now, was not there 3 months ago. All the atoms and all the molecules in that structure have all changed over every 3 months. At an atomic molecular level, you are wired for change and transformation. It's written into your DNA. The lining of your stomach changes over every 5 minutes. I just wish mine would get rid of that quirky gene that has to do with compulsive overeating. For some reason, it stays there. It's that perpetual soul full and the thorn in the flesh. And I found out that you have to treat the temporal lobes, the basal ganglia, that's the foundation of the brain. That has to do with fight or flight. And you work with that first. Then you go to the limbic system. And then the frontal cortex is the top of the pyramid. That sets you apart, how you think, how you reason. If you don't have a good functioning frontal cortex, you don't connect with feelings inside. You don't sense what's going on in your body physically. And it's how you masterfully weave all that together spiritually at a neurotransmitter level, hormonal level, a molecular level, how that all flows and works and can lead to change and transformation. You are wired that way. Now, there are certain things that are desire busters. Desire means having a hunger for someone, desiring them. Couples come into me and I say to them, do you desire the person or do you desire sex? Isn't that a fascinating thought? Something I wanted my daughters to make sure they learn very early. And I'm happy to say they got that message. It was amazing how quickly they could dump guys. And they would just say, you know, Dad, you can tell right away if a man looks at your boobs and not your eyes, get rid of him. And I thought, oh, praise God. You know. One of my daughters, she said to me, and she went to her youth pastor, and he called me up, I don't know what to do. I've never had anybody come and talk to me like this. I said, what do you mean? She said she needed a support group. She needed other women to talk to about lust and passion, and she wanted to be accountable for that. She was 15 years old. I've never had a request like that. And I said, well, if I were you, I'd support a group, but start one for the guys on porn, because you know they're all jacking off and things like that. The poor guy almost had a heart attack like, that, because that's what they think is feminine. And so she creates this support group, finds this group of young women and a mother in the church that they all kind of liked and trust, and that she called her women's group, where she could go talk about that. Well, she comes to me, I bring her home from church, and she says to me, Dad, you know, I'm going to go on a date with Dan, and, I kind of like him. And I have to admit, I've kissed him. I said, did you enjoy it? She says, yes. I said, well, beautiful. Thank God for the affirmation of your heterosexuality. If you're gay, I'd love you. But not a problem. But, this is just kind of nice to know. She said, Dad, I'm being serious. I said, I am too. She says, I want to talk to him about boundaries when he comes out. She's 6 feet tall, slender blonde, very attractive, every father's nightmare. And I want to talk to him about the boundaries they have in dating. I said, well, good, but I've got to run things by you. I want to know what you think about this. And I said, well, what is that? She says, well, I learned in my women's group that a man's crotch is kind of sensitive. Is that true? Now, 2 master's degrees, a doctorate, widely read. I study a lot, I learn a lot, I grow a lot, and somehow I wasn't prepared for that, kind of information. And so I said to her something very profound like, you're right. Then she said, I'm going to talk to him and I'm going to tell him that I needed to be responsible for my passion. I love to kiss, but I need to be responsible for that. So my hands are not going to go where your boxers are. And I know in a moment of passion you might start to touch and things like that, but I want to let you know you can't go wherever a bikini is, because I'm just too young for anything real deep and intimate or anything like that. And I can understand you might do that once, but if you do that twice, you're done. So this poor young man, he comes to the house. He's not breathing too well. I can tell that he's on the verge of a panic attack, and I shake his hand, it's cold, and I'm thinking, oh, this poor kid. And plus, he's about 5'9", and I kind of look like a giant, at this point. I did not know her older brother had met him at the beginning of the driveway and said, I know where you live. If you disrespect my sister, I will show up. And he looks kind of fierce, and he's a big guy. He's like 6'4". And then he comes to me. I shake his hand. He said, I'd like to talk to you about taking your daughter out on a date. And I said, that's wonderful. Can you tell me anything about your sexual boundaries? Poor guy goes into a panic attack. I just want to know if you have some respect, just, tell me just a little bit. And he just about fumbled out a few words, and inside I'm laughing. I'm thinking, if this guy lasts beyond the first stage, it's going to be interesting. Well, then I tell him, Amy, he's ready. She takes him into the living room. She's got this all planned out. Has this talk on boundaries with him, and then he comes into the dining room for dinner. Poor kid has no blood in his face. Then what happens is that about 6 months later, she calls me. She says to me, Dad, I know it's Saturday night, it's a Sunday night, it's a school night, and I'm not supposed to go out, but I want to go meet with him and break up with him. And it won't take long. I said, how long will you take? Well, he said, well, it'll take me 10 minutes to get to Starbucks, and 10, 15-minute conversation, and 10 minutes back. I said, so you mean you're going to meet a total of a half hour to 45 minutes? She says, yeah. I'm already feeling sorry for the guy. I said, well, maybe you can take an hour. You might want to process. Well, no, Dad, I think it'll be quick. It's just best to get these things done and over with. And I said, well, if I might ask, why was there a reason you wanted to break up? And he says, well, Dad, he doesn't show any interest in me. I have kind of an interesting life, and he only talks about himself. And now it's become no fun to kiss him. So I figure, why not get this over with now? It'd take years of therapy for him to turn that around. I'm too young anyway. I got a lot of life ahead of me before I make that kind of a decision. And I got a lot of things I want to do. I want to go around the world and see different countries and things like that and get at least a master's degree. And I said, well, that sounds fine to me. So she left, and she was back in 30 minutes. And I said, well, how did he handle it? Well, he cried. He wanted to know if he could have another chance. I said, no, we can be friends, but we're too young. There's a lot to grow up. I thought, my gosh, there's a whole new level of boundaries in the Henslin family. Every member of my family has been scanned. The other side of that story needed help to calm anxiety down, help the frontal cortex. I said to my kids, I really would like to have the first honest Henslin Christmas card and show all the brain scans on the Christmas card. No, Dad, you can't do that. And I just said, well, how about a family portrait? I think that would be kind of cool. Let's just show what it's really like. No, Dad. So I guess I have somebody that's got some taste in the family. Not me, I'm always learning. But a desire buster is when the basal ganglia, this anxiety part of the brain, is too high. Emotion and muscle creates muscle tension. And so many women, they're in that state of fight or flight. And it might even be a safe relationship. It could be an old issue, an old memory that helps keep that anxiety up, but they're not going to have a sexual thought because their body is in safety, not safe. I mean, there's nobody honeymooning in Afghanistan, because there's dangerous. And if that anxiety part of the brain is high, it's going to destroy desire and tension. Then when you look at the limbic lever, I'd like to say, if the limbic's hot, you're not. The limbic system modulates sexual thoughts and feelings. It also is our measurement of depression. And if there's overactivity there, a person's so depressed, it's like pushing a truck uphill, and they're not going to have sexual thoughts and feelings. They're not going to have desire and so on. That's why, to me, in working with people and with couples, you want to find out what's happening with the brain and integrate that into therapy, because it totally changes all the kinds of issues on intimacy and closeness and things like that. Now, your brain in love, another desire buster is anger. I have not, in the last 22 years of doing scans and working with people where there's that anger, that person you walk on pins and needles, that explosive kind of anger that comes out of the blue. And there's a whole group of medications now that are called mood stabilizers, but they're also used as anticonvulsants. And that's because that kind of rage is almost like a miniature seizure. And I had noticed that, and I observed that clinically, and when I talked with Dr. Amen about that, that's when we began to start to use that class of medications. And you have no idea. One man, in his history, he told me how he'd spent $100,000 in legal battles trying to get more time with his kids. My first thought was, well, there was a good reason the judge was keeping him away. And there was a good reason why these adult children now having kids didn't want him around the grandchildren. First session, and he told me how many therapists they'd been through and stuff like that. And his third wife was now ready to divorce him because of his rage. And I said, and I'd taken his history, and I found out about some head trauma. He was an athlete in college, and on and on. And I said, we need a scan. We need to look at your brain, because I'm sure there's injury in the temporal lobes and injury in the frontal cortex. So you don't think before you say anything, and you got this explosiveness. He yelled at me, well, I came here for therapy. You're not a physician. Stormed out of the room. She looked at me and she said, what am I going to do? Nothing. He's going to be back. It might be 1 week or 2 weeks. You just stay with your boundary that you're going to get a divorce, and he'll be back. He loves you. He doesn't want to lose you. He came back, got the scan. I go over it, and I look at the temporal lobes. That was the source of the problem. And he got it. He looked at me and said, I really have been a bad dad, bad husband. I've been wrong in everything. I said, you're not a bad person. You're one of God's children. This is injury. We don't shame somebody with a broken leg. We don't shame somebody for needing glasses to see. All I know, this is going to be a simple fix. 15 years later, he comes in, and he had to get some surgery and things like that. The anger was coming back. His children, who I've never met, said, why don't you go see that Dr. Henslin that you saw way back then? And I said, I think this is simple. You didn't get started on that protocol that you were using prior to surgery. He said, I was doing so well, I didn't see the need. I said, well, I think that's why it's just simple. Elder in his church now, kids want him around. Kids that had been hurt by him and abused by him have been reconciliation and healing, because he's safe now. We got him on the right protocol, a few counseling sessions, and things went back to normal. Isn't that amazing? We are so blessed and so fortunate to be around in this day and this age. Now, another desire part, you see, there's a function in the prefrontal cortex called forethought. Really something you look for in everybody you're working with the parents, foster system, kids. And that thing of forethought means you think something through before you say it or do it. Incredible with desire. If there's no forethought, no foreplay. Not going to happen. And that little idea, somehow men relate to that. I'll look at a scan, they're really questioning whether or not you should follow through, and I say, hey, we don't get this frontal cortex working, there's not going to be any happiness in the bedroom. Because I can point and I can look and say, what's a brain like that, or like that chances of a man actually being consistent and not saying stupid things at the wrong moment? You know, and couples get into cycles like this. You know, they work so hard to be close and intimate, and the husband starts to think this is going to be the night, and he does the one thing that disappoints his wife, and now they're back to another 2-3 week cycle until they build that trust up again and then get reconnected. Sad, isn't it? So when it comes to sex, and what's really kind of fascinating about it, because sexuality and sex for men and orgasm helps them connect with their body and with their feelings. Women have to be connected too in order to do that. Now, there's a study in Belfast of 1,000 men, longitudinal study, 5 years, and they found out that the men who were sexual 2 times a week or more, mortality rates from heart disease dropped 50%. There is no heart program out there that has that kind of success rate. So I tell men, unless you want to die, you better get interested in a quality relationship. And one man who was doing a lot of work and his wife wasn't getting interested in taking her side of the street, you know, I told her, you know, if he dies, I think we're going to have to charge you with attempted murder. Isn't that interesting? There's a connection between the brain and what we do. And so I started to notice when I got the brain working better, then all of a sudden the guy would have a thought and he'd say, you know, maybe I shouldn't react to that. I'll just let that go by. And all of a sudden the mood shifts and they're close and they're connected. Another way I bypass that as a therapist, because there is a health benefit, but we're not going to get health announcements here in Canada, you know, that sex 2-3 times a week is going to help reduce heart disease. I think they should make that a public service announcement. You know, when you think of how it's going to affect the whole healthcare system and insurance savings and things like that. It's real simple. I have a man choose one night out of the week that he's going to initiate, the woman chooses another night out of the week that she initiates. It's kind of fascinating how people change and how they look at each other when they both know there's something to look forward to. Then all of a sudden, little things that set people off, that they bounce off because they know to stay loving. And then they start to think before they say anything. Because you ever notice how the mood changes in a relationship if you use the word you? If you just staying with your own feelings, there's going to be closeness. But the moment you say you, boom, changes right there. No one hears what happens after that. The brain gets overexcited, and then all of a sudden we're in fight or flight. And what happens, is I started to learn from Dr. John Gottman, is to have people take their pulse. You know, because you know if the heart rate gets up to 85 or 90 beats per minute, you better stop the conversation. Because when you get above 90 to 100 beats per minute, adrenaline kicks in, and that's when that fight and flight response happens. And so I tell people in the session, I'll say, I have a suggestion that's worth $25,000 worth of marital therapy that always gets men's attention. Stop. Feel things escalating, stop, and just say, I'm going to get back to you in an hour. I don't want to say anything that's going to be hurtful to you or hurt our relationship. And then getting the other person to just agree to that for the sake of the relationship. and then you get an hour to process things and calm down. It takes a minimum of an hour for adrenaline to come down. Well, then people can talk, and then they can interact, and something different will happen. Now, isn't that fascinating how much biology runs things? It's kind of scary. Now, another desire buster is addictions and the brain. But a big one, and I think I'm due to stop now, is when there's overactivity in the cingulate. Because when I see that on a scan or I see it on a checklist, I know that person doesn't know how to let go. They hold on to hurts, they hold on resentments. One of the greatest gifts you give yourself is to forgive, no matter what the response of the other person. Because a lack of forgiveness, anger, and resentment only causes you pain. And it destroys your body, hurts your soul, and affects you physiologically in a tremendous way. But if I forgive, they didn't take it seriously, then you're doing it wrong. You do it for your sake, and you do it because it's the right thing to do. You do that, imagine the gift you give your children and you give your grandchildren. And it's amazing to me to see across, I'm fortunate that I still have both parents around, that we now have 4 generations of change happening. My dad has turned into the patriarch of the family because he's grown in all these areas in terms of being able to talk about his feelings. He can give a hug now, and he can do that. And each time I see him, we hug, and there's always tears because we know that might be the last moment we see each other. And that's not a bad way to live, because all we have is this one moment in time. None of us know what happens next. We only have the present. And the more you can stay in the present and doing what you are able to do within yourself to stay at peace, to stay connected with yourself, your higher power, as you define that, that's a good day. And that's a beautiful day. And then you've done something to change this world. So that's the news from Red Deer, where all the women are strong, the men are good looking, and all the kids are above average. Thank you.